So, ma'am, how do you see the difference between Indian family systems and the ones in Western countries?
Again, a very big question. This is, but I think the Indian family system is also changing. But even if you don't have the old traditional joint family, that's with all the sons living together under one roof and having one hearth. Um, uh, the extended family system still exists, which is important. I mean, the relationships within the family, within the extended family, are important. And you notice this at marriages, at funerals, but also, if you want some help for the education of your child, or a child is going to a city and then some relative who's living there from your extended family, then you would get support through being part of one family. Um, Now, this does not really exist in Europe. Uh, in Europe, you have what you call a nuclear family, so mother, father, and child of a couple of children. Even the grandparents would not necessarily be living together with this small family. Um, of course, there are cases where this happens, but the usual thing is when you get married, you go and live on your own. You don't stay within your parental home, and the family is not is important. But as I've mentioned, you have this individualistic perspective and individualistic uh, outlook on life. There, its family relations are less important than an individual's relations with his or her own friends, because there you can't really choose your family, but you can choose your friends. So that, I think, is a difference in Western culture. Usually, you would have relations with your brothers and sisters and your parents, but it might not go much beyond that. But then, of course, there are always exceptions. But I would say that also living in a family and having this stress on community living and community relationships, I think in India, relationships are very important. The kind of relationship you have with somebody, whether it's the kinship through marriage or through birth, or long-standing friendship as well. I think is a defining element of Indian social relations. Whereas in Europe, I mean, even friends, you have friends, but you make friends throughout your life, and so the people who you knew in your childhood, you would probably still know that they exist, but you would have not much of a relationship with them. So there's this notion of continuity is not there so much, but and also then living in a family, because of the stress on the different generations, from the children to grandparents or great grandparents. I think there the role that children play in a family is perhaps more than in Europe. I mean, you have children there, you take care of children, but they're not the center of attraction or a center of attention. Whereas I've seen here with the children, the little children, that one talks about the mothers here as the mother of that child, The mother doesn't have a name. She's just the mother of some little boy who's 4 or 5. Um, you wouldn't have that so much in Europe. And I think there is, when children are there and adults, then a child, of course, they say things, but it's considered bad or not good upbringing if a child talks when adults are talking. But here I've seen that children can interrupt. They ask a question, you're talking, and then the child asks a question, and all the adults go listen to the child. Whereas this would not be very common in Europe. Of course, again, there are exceptions. And I think on the other hand, you have the respect for elders, the elder generation, and myself with my silver hair, I'm respected. Whereas in Europe, this, of course, since I was a professor, I received that respect, and if your hair is grey, it's considered, a sign of knowledge and wisdom. It's just that old people aren't respected that much because there are then institutions that care for them. Whereas in India, one doesn't have that so much. I mean, it is there for the well-to-do, but children feel that it's their responsibility, their duty to care for their own parents. Whereas in Europe and the West, it would not necessarily be. But I think in India, things are also changing. So maybe India is becoming more like the West in that respect. It shouldn't. I think it should. The stress on the community and the family. I think that is one of India's advantages. One of its represents its wealth of traditions and its strengths. So it would be good if that could be maintained. And I think Europeans, when they come to India, they notice that. And then eating together in the family. Yes, that is also, I think, an important feature. In Europe, it's more focused on the group, on the individual, small groups, and then institutional association. You belong to some kind of club where you would go for your free time. You have your maybe not even neighborhood friends. I mean, they may be people in the neighborhood who you like, but you may not know your neighbors. I mean, in some big cities, you hardly have any contact. And now, of course, in this digital computerized age, you have more contact, with people who are living, you have sort of virtual contacts. Yeah. Yes.
So, ma'am, what European languages did you learn, and what are the general ways of interaction of citizens over there?
I learned, besides English, French and German in school, and Latin and Greek as sort of written languages, but you don't really speak them. And besides that, I have sort of a smattering of Italian and Russian. I tried to learn Italian because I was visiting Italy, and Russian I tried to learn a little bit, but only a few words. But I felt that it was good if one could speak the language of the country that one was visiting, because then one was able to enter into a better kind of relationship with the local people, and you could learn a lot more about the culture, get much more nuanced and deeper insights into the culture if you could speak their language. So whenever I was living in France, I did my PhD in France, and then in Germany my postdoctoral research, habilitation, and there. But I went to these when I went to these countries, I could already speak French and German because I'd learned that at school. But then, of course, I became more fluent in the languages, and I felt much more at ease, and people felt at ease with me too, speaking. When they saw that I was not German, for instance, I would look a bit different, and then but if I could speak German fluently, they felt, how is this? Because they Germans especially, they feel that German is a very difficult language, and how could a foreigner speak this language so well? And because in Germany there are also there's the Turkish community, and these are sort of guest workers, and they haven't really learned a lot of the elder generation. I mean, now the younger generation is speaking German perfectly, they're like Germans, but the elder generation didn't master the language, and so one would talk to them, Germans would talk to them in pidgin German, in sort of broken German, and sometimes at the beginning I would be addressed like that, and I would respond in High German. That's because in German there are also dialects where the region has its own way, its own version of the sort of main language, and I would speak not this dialect, but I would speak the main language. So I felt that somehow being able to speak the language of the country, especially in Germany and France, where I lived more than in other countries that I just visited, it was a great asset, and I got an inside view of the culture. And I think a language also reveals something about the culture of the region, about its history, and then of the people. And you can understand things on a different level if you can speak their language. And of course, English is spoken, especially by the educated, the sort of university educated people in continental Europe, but ordinary people speak their own language. So the mode of interaction would be in Germany, it would be in German, in France it's in French, and the French are specifically chauvinistic about their language. They feel that why should you speak English? Because the French and the British were sort of competing imperial powers, and especially with Indians wanting to speak English rather than French, and they're living in France, and they say, yeah, but this is a colonial remnant, because of course the French also had colonies in India, in Pondicherry, and so they feel also put down, hurt a little bit, and they perhaps wouldn't want to respond to you if you speak in English. That can happen, especially in France. Now, not so much. This was when I was a student in the 70s, and I ended up speaking French really quite well. And since in France, the southern French are sort of have brown eyes and black hair and that. So people thought that I was from the south because I spoke French quite well. In Germany, of course, I couldn't pass as a German, and I never adopted German nationality, although I lived there for more than 30 years. I kept my Indian passport, but it was, I think, the relationships I had with Germans was due to my being so competent in the language, fluent in the language, and it was in a way, it was very enjoyable then also to be able to speak well. I wish I could speak Hindi as well as I could speak in German, but I'm making an effort. When I was young, I was bilingual in English and Hindi from the age of 5 to 11. But then we moved to England, and I was in a completely English speaking environment. And because my mother's British, we spoke English at home. So I had my contact with Hindi speakers was non-existent, and I after a few years I forgot my Hindi more or less. I just had some basic Hindi left, and I think it was also the need to adapt to the English way of speaking, because uh, Indian English is different from British English. And at the beginning, I had, as a child, I mean, just entering puberty, I remember I'd become so self-conscious because people wouldn't understand me because I'd pronounce things slightly differently. So within about 6 months, I'd adopted the English accent and forgotten Hindi. That happened very quickly. It was I think it was a sort of a social psychological pressure that was there to adapt to one's environment. But having spoken, having been brought up bilingual, I think I was able to speak, to learn other languages quickly, German and French. And then if you have Latin as a base, Latin is like the Sanskrit, the European equivalent of Sanskrit. You have the grammar. Then the German grammar is more complicated than French or English grammar. But once you learn that, it's you can speak well. And whereas with English, it's very idiomatic, and you have to have a feel for English, which you only get by speaking, by practice, through practice. Whereas with German, and I think if you come from an Indian background, you could learn German quite well. Also because it's phonetic. It's as it's written, it's spoken. Whereas English is not phonetic, and French is also not really phonetic. I mean, there's more logic to French spelling than the British spelling, but it's also more difficult. But I think Indians have a felicity for learning languages. Usually, if you're living in India, you speak your mother tongue and at least another regional language, and then Hindi and English, so you have 3 or 4 languages. Yeah.